Hello, my name is Betsy Lake, and I'm here with Robin Nichols, and we are going to present on Ellis Chapter 11 this week on the role of implicit instruction. I'm going to go first and talk about my three main points, and then I will send it right over to Robin, and then we'll discuss which five we find are most important. So, okay, so the role of implicit instruction. The first hypothesis I want to talk about is the trade-off hypothesis. This was developed by Skehan in 2009, and the hypothesis states that instruction needs to prioritize one aspect of production at a time. Skehan draws on Levelt's model of speech production that distinguishes between three basic processes: conceptualization, formulation, and articulation. I also want to give a little bit more background on this. So as defined by Ellis on page 269, conceptualization concerns the propositional content of the message that a speaker wishes to convey and its communicative intent. Formulation involves developing a linguistic plan for encoding the prepositional, I think I'm saying that right, content by accessing lexis and grammar from long-term memory. And then articulation occurs when the plan is performed. In native speakers, these phases occur in parallel. So Skehan believes that if pressured to conceptualize, formulate, and perform messages, so if we focus on all three of those elements or all three processes simultaneously, like a native speaker does, he believes the L2 learner's speech becomes less fluent and less complex. So a good example of this that we might see is when speaking or talking about a familiar topic. Learners need less time to conceptualize, but more time for formulation. They then have more time to focus on accuracy as well. So he believes that even though native speakers can do all of this at once, our L2, our learners, actually have to focus on one element at a time to help them to actually learn best and be able to express what they really want to say. Skehan believes the role of implicit instruction is to balance the demands of performance with the requirements of acquisition. So when I thought about this, I did think it kind of made sense. Again, just being someone that has learned a second language and is still learning a second language, when I'm talking about something familiar, I find that I have to formulate my thoughts, but I don't have to like think so hard about it. Just because maybe I already have the vocabulary, and so now I'm just trying to formulate what I want to say to my listener. Now, if I'm talking about something I'm not as familiar about, I might use some other strategies to maybe talk about different vocabulary that I don't know. And so I have to spend a lot more time thinking in my brain, trying to think of the concepts, vocabulary, before I'm able to then present it to my listener. So that's this one. The next one I want to talk about is a cognition hypothesis, which also involves the pre-task planning. So this was developed by Robinson in 2007. Robinson's hypothesis has a similar goal to Skehan's ideas, using a framework to explain task variables that can be implemented to influence complexity, accuracy, and fluency. Robinson distinguished resource directing and resource dispersing variables that affect the demands the task can make on a learner's attention and helps them to focus on specific forms, such as accuracy and complexity. Robinson also explains that motivation and language anxiety can also affect how learners respond to the activities put in place. I want to also define what resource directing and resource dispersing is. We already know, we've talked about this in previous chapters and other PLC presentations about motivation, language anxiety, and how that can help learners acquire an L2 or learn an L2, and how sometimes it can actually help hinder them too. But resource directing variables reference events happening in the here and now, and transmission of simple information or provision of reasons for intentions, beliefs, and relations. Where resource dispersing variables affect the procedural demands on the learner's attentional and memory resources. They do not promote acquisition, but do help with fluency. One of the strategies that we can see how we can help our learners, again, is this pre-task planning. It's a method that can help them with their goals, as it allows the learner to access and use resources that he or she has, and as a result, increases fluency and complexity. And lastly, I want to focus on input-based tasks. What are input-based tasks? Learners are presented with input in the oral or written form. Input-based tasks assume that learners will pick up on new forms as long as the input is comprehensible or understandable, and they can notice these new forms. These tasks can help learners develop comprehension, and many input-based studies involve listen and do tasks, that's a typo, and incorporate interaction. I really like a study that Ellis talks about in his book on page 275 and 276. It was a study done by Shintani and Ellis in 2010, and it investigated vocabulary acquisition. So what they ended up doing, if you look at page 276, they end up looking at a specific grammatical feature, which is actually the plural S, or the S suffix. And they talk about there's Japanese speakers that are trying to learn English. And it was like they took them to a zoo, basically. So some of the commands that these students might hear is, please take the crocodile to the zoo, which others referred to a plural object. For example, please take the crocodiles to the zoo. So what happened in this experiment was students kind of got confused because they couldn't understand what was being asked. They weren't catching that ending S, because in Japanese, they don't have that. They don't have that, I think it's considered a morphemic difference. So they were paying specific mind to that plural S as well as the copula to be or be. So what's interesting is how they were able to figure that out was they actually started asking one another, what did she say? What did he say? Was it crocodile? One? They go like this, one crocodile, or two, three, because they were trying to figure out that plural. So it did end up working. They were able to start, I think they were able to actually understand after a while when they were able to work together. But we really kind of see this incorporation or interaction occur in order for learning to take place. Because otherwise, I don't know if just the input alone, they would have been able to figure that out. So I want to make that another note here where I say, although input-based tasks help learners develop receptive knowledge of target features, it does not help produce productive knowledge. So production-based activities may need to be incorporated. So the other thing, they were able to start recognizing through the kind of their teamwork mentality that they had when something was more than one crocodile, or if it was just one crocodile. However, they couldn't produce these phrases. So one of the, maybe one of the negatives with this, with input-based tasks is we also need to incorporate almost this output-based task as well. So we're actually focusing on some more production activities. So anyway, those are the three I wanted to present on today. Thank you for listening. And of course, my source was the Ellis textbook. And I'm going to turn it over to Robin.
Thank you, Betsy. That was very informative. And I really did like the conceptualization and the formulation and the articulation that you talked about. And I like the cognition hypothesis. I really like that as well. So, and we can talk about that later. But what I would like to talk about is task-based teaching. So task-based teaching, and one of the main researchers is Rod Ellis, and he developed his idea of task-based teaching, task-based language teaching in 2003, and this is actually the same Ellis that is the author of our textbook, so he should know what he's talking about. In task-based language teaching, learners are asked to perform various types of tasks which create content for the interactionally authentic use of language. And one of the things I picked on was maybe communicating the daily schedule to your spouse, that there is, you need to use the language in order to, the task is what is our schedule? What is our schedule for today? That's our task, is talking about our schedule. And you use that language learning to communicate the daily schedule to your spouse. Um, a task is an instructional activity that satisfies 4 criteria. Number 1, it requires focus on meaning rather than a primary focus on meaning. There is some kind of gap. For example, an information gap that motivates the learners to communicate. What is our daily schedule? The meaning is, the context of what you are doing during the day. Learners use their own linguistic resources. In other words, they are not provided with the language needed to perform the task. And number 4, there is a communicative outcome and not just the display of correct language. So you're not just using language for language's sake. So Betsy talked about output-based tasks. There are also input-based tasks. No, you talked about input-based tasks. I'm sorry. And there's also output-based tasks. So Betsy talked a little bit about input-based tasks. And this was many of the input-based studies have involved listen and do tasks. For example, Ellis, Tanaka, and Yamazaki had a kitchen task where they required learners to listen to directions about where to place various things in a picture of a kitchen. So for example, I would say something like, I wouldn't say that's total physical response, but you're responding to instructions based on what your instructor is giving you. For example, place the picture of the banana on the table in the picture of the kitchen, and then the learner places the picture of the banana on the picture of the table in the kitchen, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the physical response to what you are hearing. So your input is what you're hearing, and then your output may not be, it's not speech, but you are physically responding by putting the picture of the banana on the table. And this also goes back to maybe a total physical response, like a game of Simon Says or something like that, where you physically respond to the input you are listening to. So, in other words, the learner is given the input, and then the learner comprehends, and then the learner produces output. And again, this isn't spoken output, it may be some kind of physical output. Let's see. Uniquely or ultimately then, what emerges as important for both comprehension and vocabulary acquisition is the fact that learners need both time to process the input and multiple exposures to the target words. Multiple exposures to the target words. So, like I said, placing various objects around a kitchen, TPR. So the more time you have to process that mentally, then it sounds like the better your output would be. I think that's the thing with input, is that you can actually take that time. Instead of speaking immediately, you can take that time to do that physical task. And also, you also need that multiple exposure to the target words. And I also read that study that Betsy mentioned about Shitani and Ellis about taking the alligators to the zoo. And I thought that was pretty interesting too. Input-based tasks are well suited to low proficiency learners, and this is on page 276. Low proficiency learners of the kind that figured in these studies, because they can be designed to expose learners to the kinds of input that research has shown can assist comprehension. And they can also incorporate specific target features. I'm sorry, I can't talk. Both lexical and grammatical. making it possible to investigate if acquisition can take place. Um, so, you can use those input-based tasks. And what I was thinking earlier is that you could start off, and I'll get to this later. Let's say you have a low level learner who is maybe just starting out. You can start off with input-based tasks and then kind of graduate to output-based tasks. All right. The next thing I'm going to talk about is output-based tasks. And these are tasks that require learners to speak and write in addition to or in place of performing the task. There are two types of output-based tasks. There are monologic, where learners have to rely entirely on their own resources. So they're kind of performing solo. And then dialogic, where learners may work collaboratively. One person may work with another. Let's see. The effects of monologic, and I have a ton of typos. Skihan, because processing capacity, and I apologize, there's a ton of typos. I'm going to have to work on that. Skihan, because processing capacity is limited, they will prioritize. I think there was something wrong with that. Hold on. Skihan argued, this is on page 278, I'm just going to read it directly, argued that because learners' processing capacity is limited, they will prioritize one aspect of production over the others. For example, either accuracy or complexity, but not both, depending on the difficulty of the task. So in monologic, where they have to perform that task solo, that output-based task, they might prioritize accuracy or complexity over fluidity, or they may do fluidity over accuracy. So they can only do one thing at a time because of that limited resource model. In dialogic, Keck argues that tasks that give rise to interaction result in acquisition gains in both lexis and grammar, and that is on page 280. Closed tasks were also found to be more likely to result in negotiation of meeting than open tasks. And what he means by closed tasks are that, where is it? I lost it. Negotiation of form and negotiation of meaning. But closed tasks are also found to be like, so they were, with that dialogic, you can also promote negotiation of form and negotiation of meaning, and you could learn that way. Okay, so let's see, how do we promote task acquisition? So you have your two approaches: task design, features, and implementation condition affect the way tasks are performed. And also investigating, we can also think about how investigating how tasks can promote language acquisition. We can promote attention to focus on form and focus on meaning, because we think that maybe meaning will give way to form. We need to really think about how we design our task and the focus of our task that we design. And then, like I said earlier, we can start maybe with input-based tasks and then graduate to output-based tasks, because you don't really have to think about your production as much, I think, with input-based tasks, because you don't have to think about talking. You may have to think about performance, but you don't necessarily have to think about talking, and that does not place maybe the burden on you, that pressure to do well. And then, well, it says focus on meaning, then on form, and then we also promote attention to focus on form. So we have to promote attention to focus on form and then on meaning. And I don't know why I wrote that, but anyway, because it looks like that's kind of the opposite. So I appreciate you listening to me. And I really, the reason why I chose, really, the takeaway from this is I really liked the idea of using practical examples of language acquisition. Yes, grammar is important. Yes, spelling is important. Yes, phonology is important. I'm not arguing that. But I think that sometimes we get wrapped up in those kind of things, and then they want to learn how to take a message for their boss who is a native English speaker, or they may want to learn how to communicate with the produce clerk at the grocery store and say, I need 3 bananas or whatever. Or they want to say to the butcher, I would like my meat cut this way. um, and I like that task because it really, in my opinion, gives a practical application to what our students are learning. And this is something that I'm learning with my people that I teach in my CEP class. One of my students would the thing is that we were talking about the informal and the formal register. And the takeaway of that was that he said that he always thinks he sounds so formal because that is what he has been learning in English class. But really, he wants to learn more phrasal verbs and be more informal. Not that he wants to be a buddy to his employees, but that he wants to promote a dialogue between himself and his employees that he may not be able to say using that formal register. So we could say the formal teaching is the formal and informal register, but really the task is, how do I communicate with my employees in an effective yet approachable way? And how do I communicate all the practicalities that me learning English will entail? How to take a phone message, how to write a business email, how to communicate at the grocery store, how to tell the doctor that my child is sick. So I really enjoyed learning about task-based approach. So thank you so much, and I appreciate you listening to me.
Thank you, Robin. That was a really great presentation. I enjoyed listening to it. And I even just like hearing these last couple thoughts that you made. Just kind of comparing again the explicit versus implicit instruction, and just how I feel like you're right in saying explicit instruction seems like it's very much focused on proper English, the academic English, looking at grammar forms. But a lot of the time it does seem like the people that we're working with and that we're teaching, they really care more about the implicit instruction. What is day-to-day? Like, how do they get through their day-to-day? What kind of interactions are they having? Are they at the grocery store? Are they at the doctor's office? Are they at their kids' student-teacher conferences? And just like, how important that is that they're able to just have those normal people conversations, I guess. And I think what's so important, my takeaway from this chapter is like implicit is more of that natural learning.
It is.
So when you think about people that are maybe immigrants in the United States and now they're living in the United States, they're picking up on English that they're hearing on the streets and in their normal environments. And then when people study abroad or live abroad, the same thing. They acquire language more naturally. And so what are the benefits of trying to incorporate that maybe in the classroom setting too? So I just wanted to kind of piggyback off what you said.
I remember a comment that you made in one of our very, very early PLCs. I think I was asking a question about your college experience in learning English in a formal setting. And then when you went to, was it Honduras or Costa Rica?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica. And you stayed with your host mother because you were the one that really, and you said there was a difference in what you learned in the formal setting versus really what you learned. And what was the pronunciation about keys?
Keys, yep, you're right, good, woohoo! Yeah. So in school, I learned it as llaves, which is that double L,
Yeah.
has a y sound.
Yeah.
But when I was in Costa Rica, my host mom had a different dialect. So she, kind of an accent, right? In my opinion. So she called them llaves, llaves. And so I honestly didn't know what she was saying. And I literally had to say, ¿qué? ¿Qué dices? And she's like, llaves? I'm like, ¿qué dices? Like, what are you saying? And she's like, this. And then I finally understood what she was saying. So yeah, but or even just like vernacular or vocabulary that's used, I think it's different too. Like you were saying, difference between the formal instruction, formal way of saying things versus the how do you say just the general public say it when you run into them.
Yeah.
Like we would maybe teach in our English class, right? Like, what are you doing? I don't say it like that. I say, what you doing?
Yeah.
What you doing? Like I that's, and if we're not teaching our students that, they might not catch on to it,
One of the things that we taught with my CEP students, and they're Brazilian Portuguese, depending on how you say hello, that will elicit what kind of response you get. So you say good morning, and your person, Betsy, may say, oh, excuse me, good morning. But, or, hello, or something like that. Or you may even say, Betsy, how are you? And the expected response is, oh, I'm fine, thank you for asking. Even if you've just had just a really horrible day, your expected response is, oh, I'm fine, thank you for asking. But if you say, oh, Betsy, what'd you do last weekend? Hey, how are you? And then Betsy can say, oh, I did this, that, and the other. So, I was teaching our students how you say your greetings, is your conversation partner's responses, are based on how you say your greetings, which goes back to the formal and informal and that whole thing. But, and I'm sure there are some things in Spanish that you could say as well, okay, well, how do you say, you could say, and I don't know anything in Spanish, but, how you say your greeting depends, on the response that you want to get, whether it's a, 5-minute long thing about what you did this weekend, or just even, oh, good morning, buenos dias, anyway. And that goes back to implicit and explicit and prescriptive and descriptive. So, yeah.
Well, even I'm thinking even goodbyes, right? Like a more formal way we say it in English is goodbye.
Yeah.
Goodbye. But we might say, hey, see you later. Talk to you soon.
Yeah.
See you tomorrow. Like we might, like if we're more familiar with someone, or hey, have a good day.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
So it just kind of depends on our formality with the people we know who we're speaking with too. Is it our boss that we're talking to? Is it our kid's teacher? Is it our friend? Is it our cousin? Like that kind of determines. So I like the idea of the implicit part of it being how are they learning naturally.
But yeah, that's what I liked about task-based instruction, is it seemed a very practical way of instruction, and it was focused on form in the sense that and I had this written down, hold on, where is it? I had it written down, I think I had it written in explicit instruction. I had a whole thing. Oh yeah, here it is. Form is learning, I can't read my handwriting. Learners are made aware of grammatical forms as they're needed in meaningful communication. So learners are not necessarily explicitly taught the form, but they are taught the form as it is brought up in communication. So it's kind of like you focus on your meeting, but hey, this plural S comes up. So hey, let's talk about the plural S, and that's the form. Instead of explicit instruction about this is the plural S, and this is what this means, and we are going to use practice sentences using the plural S, and blah, blah, blah about the plural S. That is focus on forms, and then focus on meaning, where no attention is paid to form. I disagree that, you shouldn't pay attention to form. I think that you should pay attention to form, But I think that focus on forms where it's kind of come up in a naturalistic manner, I think that's the best way. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember where this was in the book. I was looking for it just now. But it did say even in this book, it was talking about how implicit is really important and input is important, comprehensible input. We've talked about that this whole semester, but they were also saying it's very imperative that we pair it without output too. Like you can't just.
That's on page, if that's the one I'm thinking of, it's on page 274.
I'm looking for it, but.
At the bottom of the page? Is it the one you're looking for?
I'm on the wrong page.
Thus, they draw some SLA theories that emphasize the importance of comprehensible input and positive evidence.
Oh.
Input-based tasks. Is that what you're thinking of?
I don't know. I don't know where it is. I can't remember where. I thought I highlighted it, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I did like how. Oh, was it right here, maybe? Oh, doesn't matter, I guess. But I was just thinking about how both can be helpful. You know, like when I think of the explicit instruction, even the plural S, like in my other class that I'm in, I was teaching on the plural S. And then also, you know, S, when it's combined, it's in syllable initial position, and it's in more of a consonant cluster. So like something like stray or spray or start, or like where you have a bunch of consonants in a row, and how that can be really hard for Spanish speakers, especially that they try to add the eh before it.
Yeah.
You know, we say Spanish, they say español.
Mm-hmm.
We say to stir, to stretch. They say estirar. So they always have an E. So for a lot of the time, you'll hear Spanish speakers say escool instead of school. Está instead of stop. And so like helping her with that, like I felt like I almost need to have more explicit instruction to explain the differences and why in English it's important that we don't add the E. And so trying to give her actual strategies by stretching up the S, start, school, so she could practice it. But also with the S's, understanding where do they happen? Why do I need it? For the suffix forms. Well, it's for plurals. It's for contractions. It's, you know, and then giving real life examples and having her practice those. But yes, also giving her opportunities to produce it naturally in her normal, you know, her normal communication.
Okay.
If she's telling us a story. She's talking about her mom in the present tense and how she washes the floors every Saturday. It's like, but if you don't have the S, I might, as an English speaker, kind of be like, huh? You know?
Yeah. Huh.
So I don't know. I think they both play. It's been interesting to do back-to-back weeks, I think, looking at more of the explicit, now the implicit. Yeah. And I think they both play a role. You know?
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is that you started out with a focus on form where that beginning E sound, so but you really, I mean, you paid attention to it, but it was more of a, let's talk about this as it happens. And now you're shifting your attention to focus on forms where you are explicitly teaching.
Right.
Do not add that E sound, that eh sound to the beginning of your words. That's not how we say that in English.
Right.
We just start off with that consonant sound.
And I think it comes again from that awareness, because my friend who was teaching this, she didn't even know she was doing it because it was so natural for her to add the eh before the s. Mm-hmm. So if I didn't point it out and have her actually practice it a little more like a drill, a little bit, I don't know if she would have ever caught on. And so I had to tell her, I'm like, this is, unfortunately, it's probably a little bit of a habit just because of what your first language is, and probably this is what you've done it for a long time. But now we need to just try to change the habit, and this is the way we can try to do that, you know. But I do think it's important to do, again, that kind of communicative practice as well, with her. So she's practicing. We're going to talk about, I don't know, we're going to talk about the dog at the park, and tell me some things that the dog did in the park, you know. Or what he's doing in the park. He's walking, and he walks. He chases the squirrels, you know. I don't know. But
But
I'm a
no,
little getting off topic, but
well, no, but you bring about, so, this draws like Schmidt's noticing hypothesis, right? Because
mhm,
now you're bringing it to the attention, and now they are noticing what they are doing. So
right.
how long do you think that you will have to get them to notice before they before it comes automatic, before from declarative to procedural?
I think that's again kind of where the production comes in, where we have to let them practice it and say
Yeah.
it in different contexts. But in this case, I felt like I had to explicitly teach it because I didn't think she was going to catch it. She wasn't going to hear it. She wasn't
Okay.
hearing it because I was hearing it in her initial reading
Right.
she was doing. Um, so, and I don't know. I'm hoping that it's successful, but I also understand this isn't something that can usually. This change doesn't happen always overnight. So it takes patience and practice and
Okay.
repetition. And I think that's just kind of my theory on it. But anyway, so I guess looking at our 5,
Uh-huh.
we did input-based tasks
Right.
was one. I did the what was it? The cognition hypothesis. And that
Uh-huh.
kind of went with the I'm sorry, I should just pull my PowerPoint up again. Oh, I did the trade-off hypothesis as well. And the cognition hypothesis kind of goes to the
Yeah, I
pre-task
noticed that. I
planning.
like that too.
Mm-hmm. And then I remember you did also input-based tasks, right? And you did
Yeah,
also
so I did that.
output-based tasks.
Uh-huh. Input, cognition, output, trade-off hypothesis, and I just did just an overview of task-based teaching and how you set what the necessary requisites for the tasks were. So TBLT. So yeah.
I've always struggled, even, I mean, in these other weeks that we've talked about this input-output. We've really talked about all semester, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I've always really struggled to know what I think is more important.
Yeah, yeah.
I still, even right now, don't really know what one I think is more important because I think, again, that notice, like you said, the noticing hypothesis, Schmidt's noticing hypothesis talks about, being able to notice forms and differences.
Yeah.
And so I think that comes from input and making sure that it's that the people that are reading it, seeing it, hearing it, they can kind of understand it. It's put in a way that they can learn just by watching, just by listening, by looking.
I like the trade-off hypothesis. I really do. I can totally see where in my head that would work. That, oh my gosh, I'm so concerned with something that other things fall by the wayside. What, sweet girl? Hang on. I'm sorry. Excuse me for a moment. I'm gonna mute for a second. You can talk, but my daughter's. So if you want to go ahead and talk, Betsy, you can.
Yeah. So with the trade-off hypothesis, I do think it's interesting because Stehan thinks that a learner can only and should only focus on one element or one process at a time, whether that's conceptualization, formulation, and articulation. I can see why Skihan thinks this, I guess, or Skihan thinks this. However, I do somewhat struggle with it because I wonder if you can really break it up or if it's really something like native speakers that we read about, that they just kind of do it naturally.
Yeah. 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 So yeah, I guess we really don't think about how we. But I even notice as an English speaker, sometimes I'm more concerned with form, especially going back to that formal register. How do I sound in front of people that I don't want to offend? And I'm very careful with what I choose and how I choose it, even though you would think, oh, well, you're a native English speaker, or if you're a native Spanish speaker, or if you're a native Polish speaker, it doesn't really matter what language. But, there are sometimes where even native speakers, no matter what language, really are more concerned with prioritizing one, are they accurate? In what they want to say, Are they fluid in what they want to say? Are they articulate in what they want to say?
I guess that's a good point.
I don't know.
Oh.
Okay, so let's say, we can say that trade-off hypothesis is number one. Do you want to say that?
I almost think input and output based tasks come first.
Okay, we could do that.
Personally. Then I think the trade-off hypothesis.
Okay, let me do that. 1 and 1. We'll say that's a tie, and then 2 for trade-off. Okay.
And then should we say we both did cognition hypothesis, didn't we?
No, we both did input.
Oh, okay, you're right.
So I'll tell you what, you want to do cognition? We could do cognition hypothesis as number 3, and then task-based as number 4. Because remember, we tied input and output at number 4, so we actually only have 4. Even though we have 5, we have 4.
So is the task-based teaching option just really focused on the teaching methods?
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. So yeah, it really is. So what is, you give students a task. And so let's say that this is how I took it. You give the student the directive of, and I would do this as an output based. You are a secretary or an office manager, I guess is the correct term now. You are an office manager in an office. Somebody calls and would like to speak to your supervisor, but your supervisor is not present. How do you take that message? And the taking the message is the task. And so, and I think that would be a monologic task, really, because you're the only one taking the message for that task. You have to rely on the language that you have. Let's see. Let me go back. Let me go back.
Okay, I have an idea. I'm sorry. I think that kind of goes already with input and output.
It really does. It really does.
So I think we need a different point for just a different point. So I think if we have,
actually, it really does.
Yeah. So we can always incorporate that in our explanation. But I think input output probably tied for number 1. Number 2, I think you're right. Trade-off hypothesis. Well, actually, I had one other idea. I just noticed on this. I did read this a little bit in our reading this week, but I also talked about it last week. So I remember you presented on this. But the presentation practice production model.
Oh, yeah.
It says, like on page 287, it says, this study compared the relative effects of implicit instruction, consisting of input-based tasks, and explicit instruction. So this kind of like goes to with what we were talking about earlier, how they're both important, and this model incorporates both. So I almost think, I know we didn't present on it this week, but I still think this one plays a part in probably our top 5.
I think so. Oh, yeah. Number 1 on page 287. Gotcha. The study compared the relative effects, presentation, practice, production. So that's kind of like that input based, because we're output based now. I think about it. On the acquisition of 70 new words, results.
Both focused on input based tasks.
Right.
But it uses explicit instruction.
Yes.
So, but then also, includes the production element, which is so important. That is one of the kind of defects of just input, comprehensible input, and just looking at input.
So let's do that instead. So I'm going to put PPP.
Yeah, let's put that as number 2.
Yeah.
Then let's do number 3 for trade-off hypothesis, number 4 cognition.
Yep,
hypothesis.
Gotcha.
And we might include a little information on the pre-task planning.
So we're going to group task-based language learning with input and output, and then PPP, and then trade-off, and then cognition.
Yeah,
gotcha.
I think that's the best order, personally.
Good deal.
Okay. Well, Miss Early, Thank you again for watching our 8th presentation. We appreciate you. And I think this is us signing off.
Thank you. Yes, let me go take care of my daughter. I appreciate it so much. Betsy, do you want to meet back in about half hour? Let me take care of my daughter and give her something to eat, and I'll meet with you, what, in about half hour again?
Sounds good.
Okay,
All
thank
right,
you.
I'll see ya.
Okay,
Bye, Miss
bye-bye.
Early.